Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day.
We figured you guys are celebrating it as well, because why wouldn't you be? Now, we've got our loose jack roaming. Hopefully she'll be really good for us again like last week. But there is a bark warning at all times. You just never know.
Yeah.
But let's hope for the best.
I'll try to be good too.
And I'll have my finger near the mute button. Hi, Michael.
Hello.
We've got a kind of an interesting topic for you this week. We were talking about things, following the Valentine's Day theme. We wanted to come up with some way to incorporate love into our conversation.
Well, I wanted to first apologize for getting very excited last week for anyone who was listening. I just really get enthusiastic about fish, and I do love them. So I thought that was a great kind of segue into the fish that we love, and corals that we love, and why we love our reef tanks, and all lovely stuff.
And now that fish is officially called that by name.
Oh yeah.
So if you ever
that
hear
was
it
his
again,
name.
That's his name now. No, that was your reactions were great. You didn't get mad at us, so we appreciate that. We realize you have children watching with us. It's a family-friendly show, and we're gonna be aware of that. I mean, we always are. But that was just a slip, an accident, and
Sorry.
And she's felt guilty all week, so we're gonna be good. All right, so let's just start this off. When it comes to, I mean, you've got a whole list of things. Do you want to do that before I do my list, or you want
I don't know.
to drop into that first?
Well,
Explaining some of the things you're thinking.
I was just thinking about fish that are monogamous. They, are mated pairs. You think about gobies, which are my favorites, cardinal fish, clownfish, angelfish. It's just really nice to see that. And there's also polygamous fish and polyamorous fish, and love is love. So whatever works for them. But I really do enjoy seeing fish that bond in whatever way that they do. Another thing I love to see is friends with benefits. So think about your clownfish with your anemone, and things like that, or your shrimp with, the twofolds. You get the mated pair of shrimp, of gobies with your shrimp, and that's another, interesting thing.
It's a throuple.
Yeah, it's a throuple. And then the other thing I was thinking about is people often ask, how do you encourage these relationships, and how do I get my clownfish to bond or pair up? How do I get my clownfish to like my anemone? And of all the things you can do, you have to understand you can't force love. If it happens, it happens. Oftentimes it does. It helps if you add things at the same time. But it's not something that you can force on something.
Yeah, it's not guaranteed.
Yeah.
So while you might put two fish together that seem like they'd be the perfect couple, they may not like each other very much. Or they may not like each other initially, but as time wears on, they might say, you know what, this is my best option. I'm going to have to pair up.
There's only one other fish in this tank.
For example, clownfish. Let's talk about that for a minute, and that is on my list, by the way. Clownfish, we like to put them together in pairs, and a lot of people want to...
Your mic is low.
My mic... well, we don't want to blow you guys out. I will make a slight adjustment here.
It's also facing the wrong way.
Pointing up. We'll adjust this slightly, and hopefully it won't be too bad. I've been making it a point to use the number 2 microphone because we had yours, I believe, at the right levels. So we'll find out in about 20 seconds if that helped a little bit. I just don't want to overdo it. Now, clownfish, when you put them in the tank together, if they're the exact same age, eventually they'll work it out. One will become female, the other will become male because they're its initially, and that will become a couple, and you'll see the smaller one typically doing this little dance or jerking motion, turning sideways and wiggling really hard. And it's saying, please accept me, don't eat me, don't fight me. And the other will kind of dominate it a little bit, and that will be the female, and they will pair up. And this might take a while to happen, but it does work. But if you try to combine many different types of clownfish in the same tank, probably going to have a couple that dominate the tank and attack all the others, and it becomes very vicious, and you always see others running and their fins are shredded. So I recommend always with a tank to just have 2 in there. And even though your tank may be huge, my friend Tammy's 800-gallon aquarium, she had 4 pairs in there, and 2 ran the tank, and the other 6 were on the run for the rest of their lives. And she ended up pulling them out and putting them in their own tanks just to keep them safe and happy. Even I think with that much space, they'd get along.
Right.
Or tolerate, we're over here and you're over there. Also, you talked about polyamorous fish. I was wondering, are you thinking of Anthias or What came to mind?
I
You
don't
just
know.
wanted to use a fancy
Yeah.
word.
No, yeah, I didn't have anything specific in mind.
Okay.
I just was trying to be inclusive.
All right, so the Anthias, like the lyre-tails that I like so much, they typically do well as a harem with one male. So you might have 5 females, 7 females, 9 females, and 1 male, and that male will continue to love them all, and try to mate with them, systematically work his way through the group. And you'll see that if you get them to the point of where they're spawning in your tank, you'll see him dart at that female, and then he'll dart at another female. And
You
he'll
get
dart
like
at
little
another.
harems and
Yeah, exactly, and that is kind of that's completely normal. And to just put 2 in the tank would be a mistake in that case, because that's not how they are normally found in nature. Fish that pair up that would be natural would be mandarins. You'll see a male and a female, and they tend to stay together for the duration of their life. They don't shop around for other, spouses.
I believe they're also in the goby family. So.
Well, no, they're not. That's the thing. Mandarins are not gobies. They're dragonettes.
Oh,
And I made a mistake on one stream, and I said the word goby, thinking in my head, I'm
Yeah.
saying it right, and it was like, oh my god, did you hear Mark?
right. Oh man. No, I'm just
And
thinking.
they all
like,
gave me crap
family-wise,
because I've been telling everyone for years they're not gobies.
Right.
So, all right, so that's just a few that we thought, it's, and then I like the one where you talked about friends with benefits, because for example, Spock swims around the tank, and a cleaner wrasse comes and cleans her gills. That is a friend with a benefit, maybe not the kind you're thinking of, but it is out there cleaning off these fish and looking for parasites and making sure they're nice and tip-top shape, and that is a very nice thing to see in your aquarium. So they get along peacefully and they benefit from each other's existence, that coexistence in the same body of water.
Right.
All right. Let me talk about my favorite fish, and then I'm going to give you guys a huge admission that you have been sitting on quietly for months. So my favorite fish
What?
is the blue-green Mandarin fish. I'll put it here in the middle of the
Ooh.
screen. This is actually the Mandarin I got from ORA many years ago, and that is Spock's body in the background. That's how small she was.
Aw.
And this little Mandarin, I have been calling it the Psychedelic Mandarin forever. And Caitlin did some homework, my face over here, and cover her up. Turns out, the green spotted Mandarin is considered psychedelic, even though that fish with that amazing pattern is just called a Mandarin. And I think science, I think everyone got it wrong, because that's definitely a psychedelic one. The green one is what I call the target Mandarin. It looks like it has a bunch of little targets on it, like bullseyes. And this thing is psychedelic. But I'm the only guy on the planet that will continue to call it psychedelic. All the rest of you need to know it's a Mandarin. I'm just going to be wrong for the rest of my life because I've been wrong for 20 years. And I don't want to change. So this is my favorite top fish of all time. My favorite is the Mandarin fish. Mandarins are easy to take care of in the regards if they have enough food in the tank already. If you are trying to teach it to eat food, that's going to be very tricky initially. They really like to eat pods, and they need a lot of rock work to pick at. And if there isn't plenty of food in the tank, they're going to rely on you to drop food in, and you're going to have to find something that works. Now, pouring in bottles of thousands of pods every couple of days is going to be very expensive. If you get lucky and it starts to eat flake food, mini mysis, pellet food, which is something mine did initially, I was shocked and so happy to see, because I could drop in pellet food every day and knew the Mandarin was getting a meal and never have to worry about starving. And I got super lucky, and it taught the other Mandarins to eat pellet, and I had them all eating pellet food. But there's no guarantee you'll have that same luck. I always recommend that the tank be established for at least 9 months before you put the Mandarin in. Lots of rock work, which a lot of you are not doing. Number one, you're not using live rock, you're using dry rock, so there's no benefit there for the Mandarin. Secondarily, a lot of you like minimal aquascapes with so little rock, there's really no crevices for these pods to breed and hide in. You can make pod piles, which is something we used to do in the day, where you take a bunch of rock rubble, live rock rubble, we put it in like a basket like you had strawberries in, flip it upside down and set it in the back of the tank where it was out of sight, and the pods would live in there, and you got near the edge, the Mandarin could pick it off through the little grate, but it was not you didn't just have them loose in the tank necessarily. But so they are semi-tricky to take care of. My next fish, I stole the image from Live Aquaria. It's actually an older image. So this one here is a Leopard Wrasse. I think they're so pretty. And the one on the top is the male, and the one on the bottom is the female. And I guess I prefer females, because I love that female Leopard Wrasse. The coloration is fantastic. I've always wanted this wrasse. I tried one time without luck, and it even says on this ad, experts only.
You know, it's interesting because usually the male is the more flamboyant and colorful of the
Yeah,
of the
because
two.
this top one kind of reminds me of a lunar wrasse or a
Little bit.
Christmas wrasse. And,
Yeah.
and you put that leopard wrasse. Look at that.
Well, that's where you see the true leopard pattern.
And the reason I fell in love with this fish in the first place is I was visiting a tank down in Austin, and this guy had 2 in his tank, and they were a mated pair, and which is weird because they looked like that. So that means it was 2 female. Maybe they weren't mated at all. Maybe they were just
Friends.
coexist. Yeah, friends.
They were
But
girlfriends.
they were girlfriends.
It's fine.
Such a pretty fish. And you definitely want to do your research on that if you're thinking of leaning that way. Like I said, I tried once. I put it in the tank. Within 3 days, I just never saw it again. I don't know what happened. So.
You know, it's interesting when I think of my list of favorite fish. Some are so simple and easy to keep and just seen in every fish store and nothing to really get excited about, but I love them personally. And then others are just so hard to keep that you need such specific tanks and parameters and temperature, and it's more delicate. So it's interesting to see like the disparity between the two.
No, I completely agree with you. Matter of fact, my list of things that I picked are not things I keep.
Right. Because they're
You'll
either
see.
they're too hard, too expensive,
Yeah. Or just I don't want to take the chance.
or they're
Or I
sometimes
don't take the risk.
it's also they don't get along with other fish. They're bullies,
Right. That's
and
the
or
risk.
they get too big. You know, there's so many different things that kind of just keep us from getting what we really want.
Yeah. So sometimes it is better to just get easy stuff that will stay alive long term that you can appreciate. Because I mean, the next fish I'm going to talk about is very normal, and yet I'm one of the only guys on the planet that likes this fish. And most people are like, oh no, I want this and this. So I'm going to show it to you now. So this right here is one of the first fish I got. That is a female trooper Kula who is putting down eggs, and that's the male, which is her hubby. The trooper Kula is different from the Ocellaris family, and it is got these big bold stripes on the side of its body.
Look, Marcus is right.
About
Look, my favorite fish, the lemon peel. You didn't even know that when I asked you yesterday.
I'm listening to this other one. It says my microphone's still not loud enough. Turn it up a little bit more. I just don't want to blow you guys out. Oh, hang on. Whoa. I think when I got up a minute ago, I hit the off button. Might get louder now, so we'll have to watch and see what. Let me know how that is for you guys. Sorry about that.
IT fail.
IT fail. It's so hard to get all the plates spinning at the same time. All right, so the Trooper Kula, the reason I say it's very popular, is not popular, is because it's so old school. And yet this is a fish that back in the day was what you wanted in your tank. And Ocellaris was kind of like, oh, you have a false Kula. You have an Ocellaris. And I thought these were just gorgeous fish, and their orange is vivid. Like I said, the thick black stripe outlining the white area. Such a beautiful fish, and yet almost no one keeps that. And that was a fish I had for 12 and a half years. So I highly recommend the Trooper Kula. But nowadays everyone wants the hybrids and
The designer clowns and all that, yeah.
Designer clowns, and there's so many. There must be 60 styles of designer clowns out there at least. But for me, I like old school Trooper Kulas. And then this one here, my next, and the clownfish don't have a specific need other than good normal reef water. You're not gonna. They're a hardy fish. They're actually leaning into the damsel family, so they can really tolerate a lot. And even if that's your first fish in the tank, it will probably be with you a long time. Clownfish are pretty durable. Now there's other types of clowns. There's some that are very aggressive.
Right.
There's some that desire a certain type of anemone, like a carpet anemone.
Right.
Like the saddleback clownfish won't go into bubble tip. It wants carpet. But keeping a clown with some kind of an animal that can host it would be best. It may choose to hang out by a cleaning magnet or a power head,
Right.
but eventually it will choose green star polyps or
Right.
the inside of a clam, which is insane.
Yeah.
Or-
Again, that's one of those things you can't force. You can put
Right.
the anemone in there, and you can't always guarantee it.
Yeah.
And I didn't actually look into if this has any kind of backing, but I was looking at the anemone tank, the cube, the other day, and I noticed that the lighter colored clownfish gravitated towards the lighter colored anemones, and the darker colored ones kind of stuck to the darker ones. And I was like, is that like a camouflage kind of
Yeah.
thing? I was very interested. Then I forgot, and I never looked into it. So if
Yeah.
anyone actually knows the answer to that, I'm curious. It could just be like a coincidence.
Yeah, I'd like to know myself. That was something I've never even noticed.
Yeah.
I look at
I
all
stare at the tank for way too long.
and see, I'm looking at the clowns for a totally different reason. I want to make sure they're all healthy, and I always look for the one that's almost albino.
Yeah,
the one that
there's very
has so
pale one.
pigmentation. It's crazy.
And that one
compared
hangs
to
out in
super
that
dark one.
super light
She's right.
bubble tip. It's amazing.
And I never noticed that. I just noticed it was on the run.
Right.
Because it's the smallest in the tank, and everyone kind of bullies it, and it comes out and darts out for a little bit of food and retreats immediately to be out of sight. But it's healthy. It's just the smallest and the lightest in color.
Yeah. The one thing, if you do add your clownfish first, when you're talking about like the more aggressive species, they will get very territorial as opposed to adding them later on. Or they have, they'll be probably a little bit more aggressive than if you did add them later on, because they don't have their established territory if you're adding them.
Yeah, that's true. One of the clownfish I would probably not recommend to almost everybody is the Clarkie, because it's kind of a bulldog clownfish, and it tends to bite you and make you bleed. So I prefer to have a clownfish in my tank that I can put my arm in and clean the glass and not be pestered and not be bit. I mean, things should not be biting me in the tank that I'm spending so much money and effort taking care of. Okay, the next fish I want to share with you guys, you might already know, and you're thinking, oh, it's Spock. It's not. It's the lowly copperband butterfly fish, and I find these to be beautiful. They're delicate. They're so agile.
Did you call it lowly?
Yeah, the lowly butterfly. Anyway, it's a beautiful fish. It's not super easy in regards to even finding one that stays alive. That's the biggest challenge. If you can get past the hurdle of keeping it fed for a couple of weeks, a month or so, it'll stay with you. And then there's the downside that it will start nipping on things you care about. I mean, we like it because it eats Aptasia. It'd be nice if it chewed down all the Mahanos. But then it starts showing interest in your hammer, your frog spawn, probably not a torch, but maybe acans or blastos. And I've been losing some LPS corals because I like my copperband that much. But it's kind of a bummer at the same time because it's literally out competing how fast those corals can grow, even in a tank this size behind me. So, you have to decide which is worth it to you more, the coral or the fish, and that's kind of a love-hate relationship that happens to a lot of us hobbyists when we're setting up our tanks. So I do love the copperband. I think it's really pretty. If you're getting one, here, I'm covering your face again. Let me put it over. Nope.
No, I don't
I'm just
care.
gonna cover you. There you go. You've got a clownfish head.
Ah!
I mean a...
I'm a butterfly.
The butterfly definitely would do best when brand new with blackworms. If you can get those, live blackworms would be your best choice. I have used frozen bloodworms as an alternative, which, by the way, I should mention, some people are allergic to bloodworms, and just handling the packages they have to be really careful not to touch their face and rinse their hands. I did not know that. There's an actual warning on the package.
Wow.
And then I started looking, and it turns out it's a real thing. And I think it's more a thing for freshwater than saltwater.
Right, okay.
But I know saltwater people told me, oh yeah, that bothers me. I have to be careful with it. So heads up, if you are using frozen bloodworms, there may be, you just make sure you're washing your hands and not touching your face or anything.
That goes, I think, for any time you stick your hands in your tank. Before you stick your hands in your tank and after you stick your hands in your tank. You want to make sure your hands are clean. We have that Reef Safe soap that I love to use before we work on this. And then I've learned my lesson. I really should
wear gloves.
Wear gloves and wash everything off immediately when I'm done, because I get very sensitive to the anemones and things like that in the tank. Yeah. Even when I was cleaning out the cube, I ended up with a
bunch of stings.
Yeah.
Yeah, and scratches.
And it really wasn't, Right. So anytime, I mean, the tiniest cut, you just have to be careful.
Right.
It's just, we're supposed to be washing our hands anyway lately.
What I did with, yeah, it's true. When I got this copperband, it was eating adult brine shrimp. So I bought a bunch of brine shrimp and brought that home with the fish, so I had something to feed it. And it went through safety stop, which is that 2-hour bath I do, and then it went into the Peacemaker and hung in that area behind Caitlin's head. And it was in there for 3 days, and I would squirt in the adult brine shrimp in there each day to make sure it was getting fed. And then I went to the local fish store by me here called Fish Paradise, and I bought bags, like big. I said, they have these little cute bags. I said, can I get 5 of those in one bag instead of all these little ones? And the employee bagged it all up and gave me 1,000 or 10,000 or whatever it was of these brine shrimp. And because now the butterfly was loose in the reef, I just poured the bag and the reef just boom, and all the fish were like, woohoo! But the copperband had a chance to get hundreds before they dissipated. And that was my plan, because it's very hard to target one fish when all the fish are voraciously devouring the food being thrown in the tank. I also like to put in the food I want them to eat with all the other food, hoping they'll taste something else accidentally and maybe say, I like that, which, like I said, the frozen bloodworms worked for a while. And then I noticed one day the copper band didn't like it at all, but loved mini mysis. Well, I put mini mysis in every single day. And now what I'm thinking, because of this problem with my hammer corals being slowly decimated, I'm thinking about putting in mini mysis 2 or 3 times a day. Maybe keep the copper band fat and sassy, and it won't want to touch any corals because it's finding plenty of food. Or maybe, because I'm throwing the food in this area of the tank, it's landing in the hammer, and so the copper band is picking it off the coral and destroying the coral. I don't know, but something has to change, or I'm going to have no hammers here in this tank.
Yeah.
By the way, behind me, through this little hole, there are 2 or 3 blasto heads. I had this beautiful colony of blastos, and the copper band ate almost all of them, but that was one spot that fish couldn't get to, and it was 1 polyp, and now there's 3. So maybe that'll be my spot looking through that hole for the rest of my life if I want to see blastos in my tank. So like I said, love-hate relationship. And then my final fish, my top 5, is one I've never owned, but I've always thought would be awesome to have, and that is the gem tang.
Beautiful.
I love the gem tang. It just looks like you have a tank full of ick.
Yeah. Don't try to pick that off.
Now, my friend Felicia won this fish in a raffle at Reefapalooza, and she was wearing a dress that had the exact same markings as that fish, just coincidentally. And so she's walking around with a gem tang, and she looked like a walking gem tang. It was pretty great. The gem tang is a beautiful fish. I would say it's definitely expensive. They can be as much as $1,500 these days, but the price has come down because of some crazy thing that happened. For a long time, they came from one place on the planet, and the government of that island put like a $500 tax on top of any gem tangs going out, so that's why they were $1,500. And now they found like another place like Mauritius is where they can find gem tangs, and so now you can get them for like $800 if you're thinking of going that direction. I've chosen not to because I have a yellow tang that's that shape and a purple tang that's that shape, but I do like looking at them, and when I go visit Tammy's house, she has 2 of them, so I get to see hers, which is nice. But yeah, I'd love to have one. It's on my top 5 fish, but it's just not one I'll probably ever keep.
And that's, that's very responsible to have a favorite fish that you just would love to have, could probably get, and you make the choice not to because it won't do well. You don't just throw it in there because you like it and hope for the best.
Yeah.
That is not ever, that's not ever the best method or, way to go. So you have a place you can go to see it, you can look at it, admire it. If you don't have a suitable home for it, don't take it home. Just like any animal. It's just because you like it doesn't mean you can have it.
Well, like even like I keep talking about Tammy, and some of you say, "Where's Tammy's video?" Tammy's 800-gallon reef had a ton of tangs in it, big, thick tangs. She was putting in, I don't know, 2-4 sheets of nori a day wrapped on PVC pipe and somehow secured it with magnets or something. And all the tangs, I mean, they were thick. They were really big fish, and they were destroying the gems. And so she had to take one out and put it in the Anemone cube, or hers is a hex, the Anemone hex tank, and then the other went down in the Refugium to live down there. So even these very expensive fish can't, like I said, she has a huge tank, but the other fish would not tolerate it, even though she wanted it. So she gave them 2 new homes just so she could enjoy them still.
Right.
All right, so now I'm going to transition to favorite, unless you want to talk about any fish or something that...
I don't know. Someone mentioned, yes, one of my favorite fish is the lemon peel angel. I love my Randall's gobies. I love a good Achilles tang. Nothing terribly exciting. I like the Bellina angel, and I really like the, not the Lamarck's. Is it the Lamarck's angel? I forget. But I have, my list is so long. I was quizzing Mark yesterday when we were going over this. I said, what's my favorite fish? And he was like, I can't answer that. There's way too many, and that's probably true. So, yeah.
And the fish you listed off just now, most of those are fish-only tank, right? Or could they be in a tank with corals? I know the Randalls can, but the lemon peel, no.
Right. What about the Achilles? It's fine.
The Achilles could, yes. And then the last one you said, Lamarck's?
Yeah, it's another angel, but I think...
Angels eat corals. All right. That's what I thought, fish-only. All right. Well, so you're a 50-50 girl. You
50-50.
like some in
Well,
reef
that's why
by themselves.
my next tank I want to start fish only.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Okay, let's talk about top 5 corals. So this coral has been my favorite coral forever. I'll give you a picture of it first and see if you guys recognize it. This is a macro shot. I used to do even closer shots of these. But this one right here, anyone recognize this bright yellow thing? I'll give you a clue. The Latin is Tubastria, or some might say Tubastria. And then I'll give you another picture of it from a further distance. That's one of my favorite corals. Here is the other picture I took once under a flashlight. So dramatic. And the flow was off. So these corals are, they live in dark caves in nature. They never see sunlight. They are non-photosynthetic. They must be fed, and you need to feed as many polyps as possible. You can't just feed a few and expect the rest of the colony to get it. The sun coral is just a beautiful coral to have in your tank. You can have it down low on the sand. You can have it in the shade. It won't suffer in light, but it doesn't care about light. And there's no real benefit to having it out in light because it's closed all day long, because it's a nocturnal, it's used to being in darkness. So if it's closed all day long, under good lighting, nuisance algae could take hold, and the skin can be peeling back if you're not feeding enough. And what'll happen is the sun coral will be overrun by algae, and you'll start seeing white between the tissue where it's tearing and shredding off, and then the algae takes hold and it keeps flooding into the coral. It'll be a real thing trying to clean it up. So it's kind of better to have it in a shaded area or a very low light area, or just a non-photosynthetic tank. I know that you can have them, like, for example, I could have one in that cave right there. That would be the perfect spot. It's super dark. I actually have a chalice living way inside there that is this big around.
You'd have to get in there and glue it there.
Well, it's a heavy coral because it's got a skeleton base, but you have to get the food to that spot at night. And one of the things that's tricky about feeding this coral at night is your fish are going to come over, or your shrimp are going to try and steal all the food off the coral. So what I did with my sun coral when it was in my main 280-gallon reef, I took a 2-liter bottle and I cut off the top part so I had the dome with the neck, and I pushed that down over the sun coral and I'd squirt food in to land on all of the sun coral polyps. That was my best approach and kept everything off, but it's very important you remove the dome within 45 minutes or so because it'll lose oxygen. So my workaround to avoid that problem, because it got really pale, the workaround was to drill a lot of holes in the dome that are small enough that water can move through. It won't lose the oxygen level in that little tiny zone, but nothing can get in, like hermit crabs or anything, to remove the food. So we want to make sure we're protecting the coral from being picked at. And I have an entire page on my website about sun corals, and it's got, 50, 70 pictures on there. And if you look in probably the first 15 pictures, it shows almost everything on my reef was hanging out on the sun coral to get a meal. So starfish came over, cleaner shrimp came over, spock came over, the flame angel, everything, and hermit crabs are climbing up, the arrow crab visited, because that's where all the food was.
Right. It's sometimes really hard to spot feed like that.
And you have to feed it at least 3 times a week. It's better to do it every single day.
Ooh.
And if you're really good at feeding them, they can spawn in your tank. You have more sun corals elsewhere, and you'll just see little buds popping up here and there.
I noticed someone said that they really wanted a blue ring octopus, and I didn't mention octopus just because, gosh, their tanks are so specific. They're definitely on my favorites list. They're not a fish, but whatever. The sad part is they don't live that long.
Right.
Got maybe like a year and a half out of them. That's typical for most.
Really small.
Yeah, that's typical for most cephalopods. And then the tank that you have to get for them, it has to be like
sealed.
So sealed, because these things are just like little Houdinis. They'll get out of anything. They love to explore, and they're just they need such a specific tank. But they're so enjoyable. They're very interactive. So that part is great. But yeah, there's so many reasons why I don't have one.
I've got an octopus story we can share. I've shared it once before, but some of you are new. A long time ago, there was a forum I used to hang out on, and this one guy posted that he bought a bunch of live rock for his new reef tank, or whatever. He got more rock for his tank. Let's just say it wasn't new, because it was a reef full of corals. And in the rock, a hitchhiker was an octopus. And so we were all like, well, who cares about your reef? Who cares about the rock? We want to know more about the octopus. And he said, guys, I'm going on vacation. I'll be gone for the next 8 days. And we're all like, now we got to wait a week to get an update. And then while he's on vacation, we kept posting any updates, just to pester him. So when he came home, he had a bunch of emails saying, update your thread. And when he came home, he didn't post anything because everything in the tank died. And what happened was, none of us would have known if we weren't following the octopus story because it's just a guy in a tank. But what had happened was his RODI system was in the garage, mounted on the wall, and one of the hoses popped loose and shot the water straight into his circuit breaker panel and turned off all the power to the entire house and, of course, the reef tank.
I've never heard this story.
Everything died in the tank. The entire tank just was stagnant water for, let's say, 5 days. The water turned black. He took everything out. When he finally posted on the thread and we're all like, how's the octopus? He instead showed a picture of his entire sidewalk going to the street covered in white skeletons because every bit of his acroporas were dead. Everything died. And it was all because this hose popped loose and hit his breaker panel, which is really kind of hard to predict other than put the door shut on it, which maybe it didn't have a door. Some are just switches, on a wall. But regardless, it was a terrible loss. It was a horrible way to come home. And, the octopus didn't make it either. But it segues me into a PSA I wanted to mention today. It might even be too late to warn you of this. You guys know there's this huge weather shift happening in the U.S. and it's really cold this time of year. And if you guys have an RODI system, it needs to be indoors. It cannot be out in your cold garage. It cannot be in a shed. It cannot be hanging on the outside of your house or whatever. It must be inside because if that thing freezes, all those John Guest fittings will split. The acrylic housing that goes around the filters will split. The hoses can actually split because it's all expanding as it freezes into solid ice. And even if you wait for it to thaw, everything is suspect and it could just blow at any time after you've thawed it out and got it going again. So the general practice is, number one, make your water indoors. It's always what I recommend. But if you can't do that, at least turn off the water going into it, open the housings, open the valves so you can bleed out any pressure, pour out some water, and then bring it inside and store it until your weather warms up again. Right now in Texas, we're, this moment, 30 degrees, but earlier this morning it was 21, which is way too cold for anyone that might be making water externally. Or it's either cold garages, because most garages aren't nearly as warm as your home is inside.
Yeah, no, it was cold, and I'm from New York, and that I was like, isn't it supposed to be hot in Texas? I don't get it. This is very confusing for me.
Yeah, no, it gets cold and icy here, and every year I warn you. But like I said, it might be too late for some of you because some of the U.S. has already been dealing with snow and ice for the last week or two, and I didn't say anything until now.
Crazy right now.
Right. Yeah, some people got snow early, but it was just quick and in and out, and it didn't do anything.
And you're talking about like sub-zero temperatures.
Yeah, and it's going to go on for days.
But you know what? Areas like that, usually people are a little more used to it,
But some hobbyists are new, and they just think, well, I can put it outside because there's all this wastewater, and or my wife doesn't want it inside the house, or my husband doesn't want it inside the house. It's ugly. So you have to find a way to put it somewhere, or insulate the heck out of it.
Or decorate it. I don't know.
Yeah. But anyway, that's just want you guys to keep that in mind. If you haven't dealt with it yet, and if nothing bad has happened, congratulations. But let's catch it now because this time of year, well, not this, I'd say March and April, I sell a lot of acrylic housings to people that need replacements because they all busted their units up. And not only that, the membrane on the top that does all the work, that gets ruined too. It expands and it no longer is efficient. So your membrane can be ruined as well, which is an expensive part. So I recommend that you protect your RODI systems from damage.
I wanted to ask, what do you think Jack's favorite fish is?
I really don't know. She's very jealous of you and the clownfish.
Yeah, she gets mad if I'm like trying to talk to the gobies. She barks at me, but she likes to look at Spock. She likes to watch the tank sometimes, and she focuses a lot. I think because she's the biggest.
Yeah, it's a big fish.
And she's moving around a lot.
It.
Yeah, so she likes to stare at Spock a lot.
Yeah. But yeah, she'll bark at Caitlin as she's trying to look for her Randall gobies. All right, the next one I like. This is an Acanthostrea. This is a Lord Howensis, and this one here is kind of a rainbow color. It's been shot in white lighting, so you don't have the beautiful glow that so many of you are used to. But this is actually a gorgeous coral, and this is one of many types of acans I've liked to collect over the years. I'm not great at keeping them alive, but they are still on my top 5 list of corals I like to get. And 2 years ago, I went and got probably 8 or 9 acans at Aquashella, and came home and tried to have this garden. And my garden is very pathetic right now. While other hobbies have this beautiful acan garden that's all filled in and fluffy. I mean, these polyps actually move in the flow a little bit, and they can be target fed. One of the things I can use in my reef, which is easier, is to use Bena Reef, or I know some of you guys like to use Reefroids, which is another type of food. And so that's one way for these corals to be fed, but they are actually very hungry. Not as hungry as the sun corals, but they definitely are a really nice choice to have, and I do recommend acans to pretty much anyone. It's in the LPS family. Again, it has a coral skeleton base, You can bond the base to rock with putty or with a super glue gel. And you can put them in groups, and lords can be all near each other. But Echinata cannot. Echinata has these sweepers, these stingers that come out, and those sweepers will eat and destroy stuff. Like over here, that's an Echinata, and I had a piece of Montipora that I broke off here that had some life. It was pretty, and it was on the sand, and then the flow moved it to the forward, and now 80% of that is bone white because the Echinata ate it, and the little bit of green that's alive is lucky to be alive. So, the next one that I love, and this is actually a picture from the ocean that I took myself. I couldn't believe I found these. These are Recordias in Florida, and they're rainbow Recordias. They have the blue and the orange and the green and the yellow, and there's a whole patch of them, and I did everything in my power to get my buddies to notice them because they were in this weird little cave spot, and everyone swam away, and I'm like, look, I found Recordias.
Yeah. Well, they have these really gorgeous, like, pastel kind of look to them, and a lot of times you see Recordias, and they're like, the brighter the better, but this is really nice.
Yeah, no, this is a really cool find. There was probably 50 in that one spot.
Wow.
And yet the spot was only, I don't know, maybe 10 inches across out of an ocean.
Yeah.
So it was really easy to overlook because it just kind of looked like rock work, you know, when you look at it. But I was so happy to find this. I shot this with my iPhone underwater. And I love Recordias. And we had a guy in our club. His name is Drew. And he is the guy that gave me the Drew's Acro that's behind me. And he used to be called Sir Ricks a lot because he loved all the Recordia. And he'd have hundreds and hundreds of Recordias filling his tank. He was great at keeping them alive. And again, this is one I don't do well with, but I still like it. And, you know, I had a couple of green ones. They're pretty boring, but I thought, all right, let me try again. Yeah. And I put them in the back, and they were with me for about 9 months, but they didn't do well, and eventually they just vanished. It's kind of funny how certain corals I can do really well with and others I can't. But that's why I always tell you, when you're focused on your tank, try to focus on all the good that's happening instead of being upset that one or two are not happy. You know, do your best, but it's going to be very hard to keep 100% of everything happy in your tank at the same time. That's why I usually say I like my tank about 3 weeks out of the year. The rest of the time I'm fighting it. But no, it's actually been pretty nice. It's been on autopilot. I've barely had to do anything with it. You guys know my biggest problem is nitrate. And with business and everything going on here, I just haven't had much time to actually just tackle the water changes, but we have a big vat of saltwater that I want to test today and see if I can do a water change. Oh. Maybe not tomorrow since that's Valentine's.
Yeah.
But very soon. The funny thing is she loves fish, so she doesn't get mad at me when I have to do tank stuff.
No.
Which is a really nice
Not at
program.
all.
All right. The next coral that I love, and one that I've never kept, is this one. And it's called the Pearlberry Acropora. And this was in Bradley J. Seifus's tank. He goes by the username Wrassman. And he has kept this beautiful colony for a super long time in his tank. And it has these beautiful violets and hints of green. And it's just, it's amazing. I love it. I've never had a frag of it. ORA sells frags of Pearlberry. So it's actually something you can get. But Brad had it forever, and then one day he had a bad thing happen in his tank. I don't know what, and it took out that colony, and he did not get another one. He just misses it greatly, and from time to time he'll post an older picture of his reef, and he will state, I miss my Pearlberry. So that is one of my top favorites. And then finally, I have a very boring coral again, but I love these things.
They're not boring.
This right here is a maze coral. And any kind of brain or maze coral I just am attracted to. And I remember I used to go to Frank's, and he'd say if he got one of these in stock, he knew I'd come buy it.
Right.
Because I was buying all of them, and I had no room on the tank because I'd filled up the entire bottom of my tank with all these mazes and brains. But I love the way they look. It's just, they're fascinating. Again, they're in the LPS family. You would think I would have said things like the Shadowcaster or, you know, the Drew's Acro or stuff, but I have those already, and I guess I love the things I don't have or can't have. So I really like the maze coral, and it's again a very easy one to maintain. They grow very slowly, and this is the one coral that people love to point to when they say corals grow 1/10 of an inch a year. When they're like, oh, the oceans are in distress, and this coral only grows 1/8 of an inch. And I'm just thinking, what are you talking about? We can grow an acro into a colony in 6 months in our aquarium. Certain corals grow fast, some grow slowly. That one, the maze coral, grows very slowly. But I love the little texture, and sometimes you'll see pictures from like National Geographic or Smithsonian where there'll be some little tiny shrimp or tiny fish perched inside the green line, just a little tiny speck of life living and hanging out near a maze or a brain coral. So that is my top 5, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. I thought it'd be a fun thing to talk about. Do you have more on your page?
No, I mean, I guess the only thing I wanted to bring up was reasons we love our tank. But this is so repetitive. I mean, when you're stressed, especially these days, I think staring at the tank is really enjoyable and kind of relaxing. And it's having a little piece of something you love in your home and caring for it. And it's just something, there's so many different reasons that we love our tanks. And I'm curious why everyone else does, but I'm sure that people have answered this a million times on your...
Well, I mean, the thing is, actually, we tend to be drawn to the negative. We look for the flaws. We focus on what's wrong, and we grumble a lot because we want it to be perfect, even though it's sort of like you plant this beautiful plant in your yard, and then you're mad that it's not growing the way you want it to grow. Even you can trim it, you can do stuff, but it's going to do what it wants because it's a living animal. All this is alive, and anything can happen in here. You name it. And we do our best to keep everything happy at the same time. My point being is that if you remove all the negative stuff from the tank, then all that's left to focus on is the good. So if you can remove empty snail shells, dead coral skeletons, clean the glass, remove the algae, then you're down to the good stuff, and you can really just love your tank. And you will. You'll love it more because it feels better. It feels cleaner, just like cleaning your house. Top to bottom, all of a sudden you're like, okay, I like my house again. But when everything's a mess, you're super frustrated and irritated. And I feel like we need to actually spend that effort on the spring cleaning every so often, just really tackle it and then enjoy it for what it is and not dwell on the negatives.
You know what's interesting? Where'd it go? Rad Reefs, he said, as a teen, my reef keeps me out of trouble. And I could see that. It gives you something to do. I mean, when you're dealing with anxiety or anything, it's just something to keep you busy. Something that is very satisfying and gratifying when you're done with it. It's just, it really is a great outlet for a lot of things.
Not only that, but it's something you can do at home. Yeah. And we've all been home for a year, right? Yeah. And dealing with that, it's so fascinating to me, and I'm still having a hard time wrapping my brain around it, but the saltwater industry had a huge boom from COVID. All the fish stores, all the dry goods vendors, everyone was selling way more than they had previously because everyone's staying home, so they're enjoying their hobby. So it makes sense. You're at home, you're either going to stream Netflix or you're going to work on your tank.
Or both at the same time, which is what I do.
Or you're going to paint some walls or you're going to do something. But the point is like we want to do something that makes us happy and gets our mind off the stresses, off the anxieties, off the negative news. Yeah. And so making something beautiful in our home that we can appreciate and share with our family and learn from, it's actually a really nice thing. So, like Caitlin said, I'd love to know what you love about your tank or what makes your heart go pitter pat for your tank.
Yeah, this is going to be a positive
stream.
Yes.
I agree. All right, great. Why don't we do some Q&A? Do you want to stick around for that, or do you want to break off?
I'm going to go walk my dog. Okay. It was nice to see you guys, and I'm glad I kept my mouth shut.
She didn't cuss once, guys.
Not even once.
And that's in like 50 minutes. That's impressive.
All right.
All right, New Yorker. We'll see you in a little bit.
All right. Happy Valentine's Day.
All right, so let me address your questions. I will. Oh, by the way, Caitlin found this today. It's a coral, but it's really heavy, and it looks like a purse, right? It's a doorstop. She finds the most amazing stuff, so I'm going to use that. And then, of course, the barnacle that was given to me last week as a gift. It's so nice. We better never break that. All right, let me shoot up here and get to your questions. Remember, in your questions, please put Anemone Loves Reef so I can find them and address them. And we're going to do what we can for a while until we run out of time. And in the meantime, what I can do for a second here is I can put some video in the background. I really need to shoot some new footage for you guys. Do I have anything else on my computer? Let me see. How about this one? Let's see what this looks like for a second. I'm going to preview it for a second, guys. Oh yeah, I think we can use this one. And maybe I can scooch this over to where I am. And maybe flip it? Nope, not that one. Come back. All right. So look for the first question. Wow, someone says it's -6 degrees where they are. Hey, Malcolm's Reef, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate that. We appreciate that. So you're looking at the Anemone cube. I filmed this a while ago, but I haven't put it on here in months. Oh, look at these nice comments. Marcus Aurelius says, I've started with a bunch of phytoplankton and copepod cultures, hoping it goes well. I've got some fish plans. That's actually a good thing that you're doing in advance. You're thinking ahead for what's going to be your best choice when it comes to your maintaining fish long term. And the phytoplankton can actually be taken up by a lot of corals too. You can use that to feed rotifers. You can use the rotifers that are gut loaded with phytoplankton and feed the reef. And then you have to hope, like for example, the Mandarin fish would then be willing to slurp up the rotifers. It is kind of a little tricky there, but the more food you throw in the tank, obviously, the better chance those fish will get a meal. And I'm going to throw this on here because I don't want anyone to miss it. Men Wear Pink says, when picking dragonets, make sure you see it swimming around and eating at the shop. And according to Tidal Gardens, they don't quarantine well. Yeah, I've never quarantined a Mandarin fish because they'll starve to death while they're in quarantine. So if you, and you know what, I think the Mandarin, I'll have to double check, but I believe the Mandarin also cannot be inside safety stop because it is a scaleless fish. It has an oily skin, which makes it more resistant to carrying some kind of fish disease, but that doesn't mean it's bulletproof. It still can get sick. So you want to inspect the fish before you buy it, make sure it looks super healthy, and if it looks good, if it passes, your eyeball test, then you can put it in your tank. But there is going to be a chance, maybe something might sneak in. It's I would double check the safety stop. I don't want you guys to hurt the fish trying something out, or contact Blue Life yourself and ask them. But I have purchased mandarins in the past and put them directly in my reef, and I didn't think twice about it because I knew that's where all the food was. And I want to make sure they got a good meal. Oh, that's nice. Robert Miller says he had 6 months ago he got a captive bred biota mandarin and he was eating mysis from day one. I love that. Gregory's asking a question. What's the good rule of thumb on the water volume? He says there's a 139-gallon tank according to Red Sea, but how much should you subtract for rock and equipment? And how much should you subtract inside the box because it actually holds less water than using the outside dimensions? You're going to have to basically use some math to determine the actual area of water in your tank. And then, yeah, you're going to have to estimate your sand and rock of how much it displaces. Sand you can kind of look up with a sand calculator and kind of get an eyeball idea. Or the other option you can do, which is kind of easier, is drain out 1 inch of your tank into a bucket and see how much water you get. And then you can basically add up your inches as you work your way down and say, okay, there's 18 inches of water in my tank. Each inch represents 3.1 gallons. I have this much water. And then the same thing with the sump. That one's a little easier because it's usually just acrylic wall-to-wall or glass wall-to-wall. You can measure inside length, inside width, inside water height, hit equals, and then divide by 231, and that will give you how many gallons are down in your sump. Wilmar says, I have a black clown with solid white stripes and loves sleeping on the bottom of my left side of my tank for the past 9 years. Wow. Well, like I said, not all the clownfish read the same books we do. Luke says, I have a 75-gallon reef and I'd like to get a snowflake eel. I have a pair of clownfish that are about 1.5 inches and a blue throat wrasse that's 3.5 inches. Are there any problems? Thanks for all your knowledge. If you get a very small snowflake eel, you'll be fine. And if you're feeding the eel on a regular basis and it knows you are the food source, or you and your tongs, that will help a lot in overcoming the fish's desire to go devour your other fish. But you got to keep in mind, these are fish with their own minds, and they may say, you know what, I think you'll fit my mouth. If it's hungry enough, it could actually go after something. So that's why I'm saying, if we can keep our fish fat and sassy, where they have no reason to feel like they are going to starve for some reason, there's a better likelihood of your livestock being completely safe with that eel. A lot of people keep that eel. You do need to keep that tank covered, because it could jump out, and you don't want that to happen, because if it's out on the ground, it's going to die. But yeah, I would recommend small. I like the smaller the better. Drives Caitlin crazy. I put these tiny things in my giant tanks, and then we can't find them. Uzi says, I have a 13-gallon tank, and I put 3 blue hermit crabs in there, and they ate all the algae. That's great. But now what can I give them? You can put in some pellet food once a week. You can put in some flake food. You can just let them pick at the rockwork. There will always be something for them to snack on. And if you even have 1 or 2 fish in there, those fish are going to poop, and there's a chance those hermit crabs are going to find that and snack on that as well. Somebody's dad asks, if my salt mixes up to 9.5 DKH, what DKH should I aim for in my aquarium? I'm using reef crystals, and my tank is mainly acros and Montipora. My magnesium is 1500 and my calcium is 490 due to reef crystals. Well, as your corals grow, they're going to absorb that alkalinity, so it may come down some. I understand you made your first batch of salt water and it was 9.5, so your tank was 9.5. But as you know, alkalinity drops over time. And as it goes down, day after day after day, that's why we are dosing more to replenish it. So when you're doing a partial water change, even if your water change does have a higher DKH, let's say you're changing 5 gallons out of 50, that 9.5 won't suddenly do some crazy thing to your corals when they're all sitting at 8.5, for example. But it is nice when they all match, and I could understand you're wanting to do that. My personal goal is 9 to 9.5. So in that case, that salt would be perfect for me. Lucas says, what do you think is the key to keeping cleaner wrasses long-term successfully? It's funny you say that, because I did a video where I showed the cleaner wrasse I got, and I told everyone, this is a really tricky fish, and it's super hard to keep alive, and it has done well. But the funny part of that story is that everyone commenting says, I got one, I must be lucky, I had no problems at all. But I remember people would get cleaner wrasses, and they'd die so fast, and it just was death after death after death. It just was like impossible to keep them. And I can't even tell you what's changed. But I guess if the tank is super young, with it's not mature enough, there's not enough stuff for that wrasse to go pick at, including a decent bioload of fish to visit and clean off, it could be at risk of survival. Also, it would be great if your cleaner wrasse was eating some of the frozen food you put in each night. If you put in pellet food or flake food, or some kind of thawed frozen food, or even some kind of a liquid food from Reef Nutrition, those foods could benefit the wrasse as well. But you have to watch and see what the wrasse is eating, if anything. And if it has something that's a staple diet you can put it on a regular basis, that should give you more of a leg up on success of keeping it long term. But yeah, no, I really thought they were tricky to keep, and I was really glad I had it, and I was super pleased that it was living. But yeah, it's still swimming around now. I just saw it a few minutes ago in here, and I saw it in this video as well. It hasn't been a tricky thing at all, which that's exactly how I remember them to be in the past. The one says his favorite, and he has a mated pair of, is the black ice longfin clownfish, and feels that they are the most beautiful in their opinion. The longfish clownfish are so strange to me. I've seen them. I think they're crazy, and it's definitely man-made. But yeah, there's something for all of us. That's the end of the video. All right, let's go back to this. And look at me for a minute or so. Lynn says, have you ever heard of anyone using lava rock for biofiltration? They're saying that lava rock has a lot of surface area for bacteria to grow. I'm thinking about putting in the sump. We don't recommend lava rock in saltwater aquariums. It's used in freshwater because apparently it's not a problem. But in saltwater, lava tends to have metals in it. And you know where lava comes from. So we don't take a chance with our tanks. And usually a tank that does have lava rock doesn't do well. And when people finally determine, oh, that's what's in your tank, they say pull it. And then the tank starts to improve. So I would skip that. If you're wanting some kind of rock for biofiltration, you could use the export brick from Brightwell. There's all these other brands out there with these circles and discs and bricks and slabs, and they all can fit in different areas of your sump. You've got an abundance of choices out there to use that has that crazy porosity that's supposed to help with bacteria. You'll also need to dose bacteria along with that to populate it. Kayvon says, do another video on Tammy's tank. I've already shot it. I just haven't taken any time to film it. I had some of it on one device and I had some of it on the other. And when I imported, I was missing half my footage. And I have to track down the rest, get it all together in the computer, and build that video for you guys. Turn this off. There we go. I'm seeing all these choices of things you guys like. Like one person really likes the Moorish Idol. Another one likes the Regal Angel. The Regal Angel is really pretty. I do agree with you there. Sorry, my neck is hurting today, guys. Michael says, how do you suggest splitting the drain lines to the skimmer and refugium section using either the Herbie, which is 2 drains, or bean animal, which is 3 drains? Would it upset the main drain siphon? Hey, can you do me a favor and turn off the ring light?
Oh.
Thanks. There's a knob on the bottom, you just turn it. When you're trying to do 2 drains from the tank into 2 different parts of your sump, you could use the main drain, the full siphon, to go in the skimmer section, and you could use the Durso drain to go to which is the Herbie, I guess, which could go to the refugium zone, and then you have your emergency drain that goes nowhere, which can just go anywhere in the sump, even in the return zone, because if anything's coming down the emergency drain, you want it to be loud and noisy and get your attention so you can fix it. On my own tank, I have a double Herbie drain system, and I'm sending 1 full siphon into my skimmer section. I've got a restricted full siphon going into my refugium for lesser flow, and I have a 3rd drain that is basically an emergency drain in use that is going into the Clara Sea area / sock box, depending what I'm running. And then I have a 4th drain that has nothing coming out that is truly my emergency drain, but which would dump out near the Clara Sea / sock box. If you only have a single drain coming down and you need to split it, you can bring it down and put a ball valve, bring the line down into a T-fitting and then a ball valve underneath it, and then continue the drain into your sump. And then as you close the ball valve, the water that was trying to go straight down will be forced to go out the T and go across to like a refugium zone. And on my website, I have a plumbing section when you go to the articles, and you'll see the one where it says how to have 1 drain go into 2 areas of a sump, and you can look at the pictures and give yourself some visuals, and it's not that hard to accomplish. It's just a little bit, you got to put the valves in the right spot. If you put them in the wrong spot, it's not going to do anything, and you'll have to have these dumb valves you paid money for. So make sure you've got the drain go down through a T into a valve, and then the pipe goes down, and close the valve, 20%, 30%, 45%, whatever. And as you close it down, you will end up having water diverted over to the refugium zone. Macy's Daddy says, what favorite fish or have you had to give up or rehome because it wasn't compatible with your reef? Not really any. I pretty much don't put anything in my tank that isn't compatible with my reef. I'm trying to think of anything I ever put in that I wanted to remove specifically. And in all the years of reef keeping, I had a couple of fish that I got that ended up being a problem later. For example, the long-nosed hawkfish became really big and quite the bully. So I ended up catching it, removing it, and getting a smaller one to replace it because I like that fish. Mine was just too big and mean, so I gave it to the fish store. I adopted a puffer fish, the Porcupine Puffer, but I didn't trust it. So I never put it in the main reef. I had it in my frag system, and it ate a clownfish, and so I named it Murderer, and I gave it away. But the puffer was a nice fish, just very messy, so I wouldn't put it in my tank. But some people do keep those in their reef without any problem. But I was shocked. Not only did it eat a clownfish, it ate the face half, and the tail half was still in the tank. So I was like, nope, no chance. Other than that, I had a powder blue tang that was really a problem. It kept mowing down the tentacles off my leather coral, and it was basically an ick magnet. It would burst out an ick, and then it would just evaporate away. It was almost like a porcupine putting out the needles, and then they'd be gone. And then, another weird day, it's covered in ick, and then it's gone again. It's the strangest thing ever. And I had that fish for about 5 years, and I kept thinking, it's such a pain, but it was mine. And then one day I had a terrible accident in my tank, and it died. And I was really sad because it was a beautiful, healthy fish. I mean, it was very thick, but it is what it is. But the leather coral turned into this fantastic showpiece of a coral once the powder blue didn't exist anymore. So my tank actually benefited from that horrible accident where I lost some fish. But I can't think of anything that I ever had to rehome that I put in my tank and thought, oh, that's a big mistake. I think whatever goes in is there for life. Let's see. Lucas says, I have a 3.5-inch marbled wrasse, and today I bought a 1-inch yellowtail wrasse. Any tips on avoiding aggression going in with the cleaner wrasse and the firefish in the acclimation box after quarantine? Well, the acclimation box, if you can keep that fish in that box healthy for 3 days or so, after that duration, you should be able to release it into the tank and have very limited aggression or even no aggression. So I would just recommend that you keep it in there long enough, but make sure there's enough flow. If that acclimation box is pretty much stagnant water, that fish may not make it. So there needs to be plenty of holes in there, but enough to let water go through, but not so much that the fish can get out. You may need a cover on it too, so it can't jump out and into the reef. And then finally, if you can't do either of those, well, you definitely have to have the lid no matter what. But if you can't have holes large enough, you could insert a very small sichet pump that's mounted on the side of the box that pushes water in from the tank, and that'll force water out of the box however it can get out. And that way at least you're bringing in fresh water into the box constantly, so that fish will be okay. Make sure you're feeding it several times a day while it's in that little box so it's getting a meal. And if too much food accumulates in the box, siphon that out like you would with a quarantine tank. But yeah, the whole peacemaker premise of keeping the fish away from all the other fish, keep the newcomer away from all the regular fish for several days, but let them see it, but can't touch it, is worked really well in my favor whenever I had to add something new to the tank. Brock says, what 2 corals would you choose for a single tank? Big colonies that fill the tank. And what are 2 fish to accompany the 2 corals? Schooling fish, feature fish, same 400-gallon tank you have. Oh, wow. A big reef, 400 gallons with only 2 colonies?
That'd be really nice.
I've seen 2 different tanks that come to mind. But 400 is big. That's a big ask. One that is up in Denver, I believe, is a tank that's just filled with hammer coral. It's one giant colony, probably 3 feet across, 4 feet across. It's insane. It's pretty much one of a kind. And that entire thing has been living like that forever. And that's a really cool, at this point, it's a species tank, right? There's only hammer in there and whatever. And then the other tank that I saw years ago, beautiful, beautiful system, was a giant Staghorn Acropora. And it was a stag forest is what he called his tank. And it might have been 2 colors of staghorn, like green and purple, all intertwined, but that was it. And then if you could do something ginormous like that, a 400-gallon, that's kind of a weird shape. It's long and rectangular. So you're almost needing, like you said, 2 things. Or you could have
2 staghorns or something like that, but it's going to take a long time to fill it in. I mean, it's big.
I know it's not coral, but I keep thinking of those anemones.
Yeah. Caitlin was saying there's also the option of anemones, but then you have a bajillion anemones. And then for fish, you have to find someone compatible with the coral you like. But like, let's say you had the hammer coral colony, like let's say you said a whole tank of hammer, which is insane and awesome. And I wouldn't try to do something crazy like the beautiful Australian orange ones that are so vivid and cost $1 million, because those are the first to die when something goes wrong. I would try to use something really stable and solid, something easy, but just the fact that you grow it in this giant mass would be huge credit worthy, and about what a great reef keeper you are. And then you could fill it up with like 50 blue damsels and they would just swim around. It would be this really cool scene out of the ocean where you have a giant colony and a bunch of tiny fish just living around and in it, and that would be a really cool effect. But they could yell at each other all they want because they're all mean, so that would be kind of the way I'd lean into something like that. Elmer says, Caitlin, have you seen the movie My Octopus Teacher? I highly recommend it.
I actually have not.
We haven't watched it yet, so we'll have to check that out.
Thanks.
She says thanks for the recommendation. Alex says, thoughts on bubble coral? Bubble coral are really nice. I've kept some really nice colonies in the past. I really enjoy them. I like the pearl bubble, which are tiny little bubbles and very hard to come by. And then there's the standard bubble with these huge, like, grape-shaped bubbles. They're really nice too, and they can really take up some nice space. They do sting other things nearby. They want lots of space around them, but they're really pretty, and the motion is nice. And what they do at night, how they invert and kind of retract their bubbles, but put out all these like sharp-looking tentacles. It's a real visual treat, and it is fun to feed that coral. Jam says, I'm trying to get a 6-month-old tank ready for coral. If the calcium is measuring weekly at 480, is that something to be concerned with? No, it's a little high, but not much. It's the target range is 375 ppm to 450, and you're at 480, so not too bad. And once you start putting corals in there that take up that calcium as well as the fish, that will help. Even coralline will start absorbing it. It may come down, and then at some point you may need to actually dose some calcium again. I didn't even mention Zooanthids. That's another very popular coral, and I do like Zooanthids a lot. I haven't kept any in forever. I have a few here and there, but nothing like some of you collectors that just fill a tank with beauty and like a million little flowers. Macy's daddy says, my little dog Macy insists I hold her up to see the fish. She will bark at me if I look at the tank without her.
Macy.
That's great.
Call Macy Jack says hi.
Macy, Jack says hi. Brock says, if you don't see green green slimer, red Monty Cap, and mushrooms, are you even a real reefer? Those are all old school corals, and the green slimer is still one that I don't do well with. But finally, at least I can do the blue torts. The blue tort Acropora. Hey, Robert. Thank you very much for the super chat. We appreciate it. Insane Reefer says, I'm out of Perdivia, so I'll be contacting in the next 2 weeks. Do you have the standard size? I need the whole kit. Yes, I am fully stocked on Perdivia products. Anything you need, I've got it. Matter of fact, this is my chance to put a little tiny thing on the screen, right? That's assuming I can find it. I moved my little window and now I can't find it. Oh, I know I can't find it because I added all these things today. There it is. So when you guys shop at Mila's Reef, I appreciate it. It allows me to continue to provide you guys with products I use myself. They may be things I just sell out of the shop, or they could be things that I build. And you know, so every day orders go out, and Whatever you do to support this channel and support my business is greatly appreciated. I realize you have a lot of options out there. And, but when you buy things from Miller's Reef, you know you can always ask me questions about how to use it, which is an extra perk. So I'll leave that on the screen for a couple minutes. Miss Sale, I think that's correct. Thank you very much for the super chat. They said, first time watching live, thanks for all your knowledge and wisdom. And Luca says, put zeolite in a reactor, your nitrates will get lower, I guarantee it. One person said, I need pearlberry in my life. Boy, do I agree. And Macy's daddy is recommending I set up an automatic water change system for my tank. I have a terrible back and it saved me. The tank stays so stable. I just have trust issues. I just feel like something's going to go wrong and it's going to cause chaos because it was automated and I didn't pay attention to what was happening. Insane Reefer says, does the maize coral take over the rock? It can, sort of, but it's so slow that I think you'll see it coming. I have kind of a, it's called a Platygyra over here behind all these dumb Palithoa. And it grew, well, they're just horrible. It grew up and it's hiding basically a maize coral. And that maize coral grew across and touched this rock. But that's in 7 years. So it's not something that you're like, oh, I'm going to lose all my rock work to this coral. It's very gradual. At first it has its own rock. It will cover it. It can actually get bigger on its own. Or if it's touching a rock, it can kind of basically join them together. You could actually break them and remove the big piece and have the smaller one and continue the growth and just enjoy it and sell the big piece to someone else. Paul, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate that. I'm just looking for the next question, guys. Dustin says, what is the difference between a tank transfer and just buying live rock and live sand and putting animals in right away? Well, it's sort of similar. You know, when you are doing that, what you're doing is you are it's very similar, actually, the more I think about it. However, a tank transfer, we're usually removing everything from one tank that day and transferring it to another tank. Where setting up a brand new tank with brand new live rock and brand new live sand, you're kind of trying to skirt the cycle, and you're hoping that the new everything will handle the bioload, and there's not the bacteria level that you need. Yeah, he said put everything in. Start putting animals in right away.
My guess would be everything that's in the tank and is being transferred is already used to everything, whereas if you're buying things from the store, they're not used to the parameters. And
Yeah. Okay, so here's your scenario. If you have an existing reef and you break it down and remove everything, everyone knows everyone, right? You have all these fish and corals that are all used to interacting with one another, and they're used to their danger zones and their safe spots. You're taking that all away temporarily, and you set up the new box and you put the sand in there, whether it's been rinsed out or you're reusing the sand or you're using clean sand. And then you put in all the rock and you put in the corals as best you can and you add your fish. And they kind of have to work it out again, but they kind of know each other. But if you go out and buy a glass box and you get yourself some live rock and you get yourself some live sand and you set it up and you go buy animals to drop in, that's not a transfer because everyone's a stranger to each other. And that can become semi-aggressive, actually, because there's so much going on. Now, a lot of times people like to think if you put a lot of fish in at once, there's less aggression because everyone's so confused and they have to work it out. But it's not a transfer. It's kind of doing an insta-reef, which may or may not work out. Probably won't work out. Again, it comes down to the bacterial load that can handle the bioload. And we would never want to rush something like this. We want to take our time and we want to make sure that it can handle it. And if we even go back to the days of Tanked, the TV show on Animal Planet, they would set up a tank with live sand. You saw the bagged sand. They poured in all that salt water, and then they introduced a ton of fish, and it looked really cool on camera. And even if it did take them a week to do that, but they show it in 40 minutes, you know, even if it wasn't like all in one day. After the show was done, they took out half the fish anyway because it was too much bioload for that brand new tank. And they weren't even using live rock. They were using, you know, these artificial inserts, and there's no, pouring in bacteria in a bottle will just not coat all that enough, and it's not porous enough to absorb it. It can't handle that massive load. It looks great for a moment, for like a fancy dinner, but it's a terrible solution. And like on this tank here, if I had a bunch of people come over, I would not go out the day before and buy 30 new fish and drop them in so that when everyone's here standing in front of the tank holding a nice beverage, they get to see a lot of activity. That wouldn't work for me or for the livestock. Instead, they see what I have, and if they wish I had more fish, they can wish it. Doesn't mean I'm going to do it. My tank is my tank, and it's going to be the right amount of bioload at all times. But I think that's pretty much my answer to your question, is that we want everything to be had a chance to build up to handle the bioload, and so that's why it's different from a transfer. Grant says, RODI unit connected directly to a sump or no? I highly recommend you do not do that. When you take a RODI system, let's say it's a 75 gallon a day system or a 100 gallon a day system, and it's hooked up to your sump with a float valve, each time the float valve goes down, the RO system turns on and it pumps that water into your sump to replenish, right? That can happen 3, 4, 5 times a day. Every single time the RO system turns on, the water sitting around the membrane, even for 20, 30 minutes, an hour and a half, that's going to have a bunch of TDS on it, and that's all that TDS is going to flush right into the DI and destroy a bunch of resin rapidly, and then it's going to bring it down to 0, and it's going to come out the RO tubing and near the float valve into your sump. But two things are happening. You're destroying DI resin really fast because of the cycling on and off, and the cycling on and off repeatedly also wears out the membrane prematurely. So it's so much better to have an RO system turn on once or twice a week to make a body of water, 15 gallons, 20 gallons at a time, and use that for top off. And then you can have a small container. I make them out of acrylic, and you can fill it up with RO water and have a small pump in there with a automatic top off system where it drags water out of that and puts it in your sump as needed, and then you refill that as needed as well. I was meaning to bring over here on the walkboard the top off container I just built last weekend to show you. Yeah, if you can get it for me, that'd be great. It's in the back room. I think it's on the on top of the Nio skimmer. Next one. I'll make a space.
I apologize because I'm in my PJs.
Thank you very much. So here's one that I just built. This one is 8 inches by 13 inches by 14 inches, I believe. It's got a nice opening on the top so that you can pour in like a 5-gallon jug in there. It has a small hole for the pump that's going to sit in there to pump water out and into the sump. And you can have a float valve in this, for example, and have the RO unit go to this and fill this up without lifting a bucket. And then the water goes in with the automated system as needed, and then it drops and drops and drops, and then finally it gets low, and you turn on your RO system and refill it till the float rises, and then shut off the RO system. That is your best approach. And it's what I've been recommending for a super long time. Pam says, Happy Valentine's Day, Caitlin and Mark. Hope you have a romantic, relaxing time together. I like the sound of that. Jay Riley asks, do you still use the biopellet reactor? I am not using one at this time. Min Key says, can I use a car windshield restore to remove scratches on the inside of my aquarium? My frag tank left a huge scratch in the front pane. If the tank is made of acrylic, you probably could buff it out with that, but you'll have to drain the tank to do it and remove the livestock. There are kits used to restore acrylic. If it's glass, you can't do anything on the inside. It's very hard to polish scratches out of glass, period. My tank behind me has a few scratches, and I just have to ignore it. No matter how frustrated I am that these scratches exist, I do my best to have as few as possible, and there's probably 7 real scratches on all this glass in 7 years.
Call Safelite?
No, can't call Safelite, can't do anything. They can't do anything inside the tank. Using the Jeweler's Rouge and all the buffing pads and all that they do on the outside could be done. That could be done, but not inside, unfortunately. Usually, one of the tricks you can do with a tank is you can turn it around backwards, and you can have the back panel on the front, because usually the back panel A lot of people ignore it. It's covered in coralline or whatever, and it doesn't have any scratches on it because you're always working on the front, or they didn't, or you bumped rock against the front, or however you scratched it. So sometimes you can just turn the tank around and make that your front for a while, or you just replace the tank with a new one that has less scratches, or 0 scratches, to be honest. Man, some of these people are really cold. Minnesota last night, minus 22.
What?
Yeah. Brandon says, you're from New York and you live in Texas. You're going to be in for a lot of weirdness.
I know. Oh my gosh. Especially, yeah.
Macy's Daddy, thank you for the super chat. And for them, we're supposed to spend it on dog treats.
Yay.
So we'll do that. Jack says, thank you. Make says, why do I keep finding empty snail shells? The snails are dying, or hermit crabs are killing them and eating their meat and leaving the shells behind. That's a couple of ways that happens. And it's kind of normal on a reef, unfortunately. I just remove them so they're out of sight, and that way you don't dwell on the fact that you've lost some snails. And eventually you need to get a new batch of snails. The blue leg hermits are the most aggressive, so if you have blue legs, they're more than likely the ones attacking your snails. Also, some wrasses eat snails. And I think you posted a comment in here earlier about wrasses. Was that you? And if that's the case, like a yellow chorus wrasse would eat snails, and so that could be why you are losing some snails. So you'll need to get some new ones from time to time. But I recommend red-legged hermit crabs because they're less aggressive, or tiny, and I mean itty-bitty blue legs, because they're so small they can't do any damage, but they still are good as a cleanup crew. Paul says, is it okay to leave the tank lights in the red channel all night long so I can watch the fish at night? Can fish see red light? They can't, so you could do that, but I wouldn't leave it on all night long unless you're staying by the tank all night long. I would still like to see your tank have a rest period, like when you sleep, then the tank should be dark. I wouldn't have like daylight all day and then red light all night. There has to be a period where it's just pitch dark, and just let everything respirate and let everything relax and just get some slumber time in. My own lighting, everything's off by midnight, and then nothing comes on again until 11 a.m. So there is a period where there's nothing. I mean, there's some daylight coming into the room that kind of gets on the reef a little bit, but not much. And since we got these new blackout curtains, there are days where the reef has no idea what time it is outside. Travis says, when buying new fish, do you recommend treating them while in quarantine just in case they may have any parasite or disease, or do you recommend not treating them and just monitoring them closely? When you buy new fish, it's great to put them through safety stop first, and that's a 2-part bath. It's 45 minutes per bath. So you acclimate, you put part A, 45-minute bath, you move it over to part B, 45-minute bath, and then put in your quarantine tank. At this point, I would just observe and feed, and then if you were to see anything over the next 21 days, you could then treat for that specific illness. But I wouldn't just put something into the quarantine tank that is some kind of like all-encompassing medication hoping to catch whatever they may have, because it could actually build an immunity in that fish to where it won't do well when you have to medicate. So I do the bath to remove external parasites. Then when you're observing and you're feeding, that fish is getting fed, you can actually observe not only how the fish looks outside, but you can see if the fish poop is stringy, which means it has internal parasites. You might have to treat for that with medicated food. That's a really hard thing to treat in a reef, so you want to treat that fish for that with medicated food in quarantine for I don't know how long, let's say weeks, until it's completely out of their system, and now you can move them in. And the big problem with having fish that are producing stringy poop is that one pushes it out and the next one gobbles it up, and now it's in their intestines, and they just keep sharing this darn thing. So if you have one fish with it and it poops it out, it's not going to eat its own. That's no problem. But if you have multiple fish in the quarantine tank, there's a chance they're sharing it, and you have to medicate the food for a while until you just don't see it anymore. And the best thing I can tell you is that no matter what you're trying to figure out about fish disease, is go to Humble Fish's website, which is humble.fish, humble.fish, and just hit enter. Thomas says, does Rod's Food have a website to buy food? And does Rod's Food go bad? I can't find an expiration date on it. It doesn't go bad, and it can only be bought in fish stores. And Thomas, I believe you work in a fish store, so you can actually ask your fish store owner to bring that in for you. And even if they say they don't want to, they can, because their distributor carries it. And if you still can't get it, then you contact Rod directly through his website and tell him what store you work at, and he'll make it happen. Because every distributor has Rod's food on the shelf, and when they're saying we want to bring in LRS, they, the store owner says I want to bring in LRS food, Reef Frenzy. They also can get Rod's food. So the store owner is just literally choosing to only buy one thing for whatever reason. The fish store by me, Frank's Tanks, when I go there, he will bring in Rod's food, he'll bring in Larry's food, he brings in PE Mysis, he brings in Reef Nutrition, he'll bring in anything, because every customer has a different need. Just like when you go to a restaurant, the menu's huge, and you might like 2 or 3 things on the menu, but there's 100 choices because everyone has a different need. So don't ever let a fish store owner tell you they can't bring something in, because they can. They're just not wanting to. And if you say, look, I'm going to pay for it in advance, let me know when it's here, I will wait. In a week or 2, you'll have what you want. Skyman says, is there any reason people use granular carbon as opposed to RO carbon filters for filtration other than a potential to clog? Are you talking about in the aquarium, or are you talking about in the RODI system? Because I can't really answer that question until I know what's going on. I do know that we have 2 choices of carbon for the aquarium, and that's pelletized and granular. And it just depends which one you want to use. I've used both my reef tank. I didn't see any difference. I always put them in a reactor, and I don't want it to tumble. I just want the water to flow through it and come out the other side nice and clean. If you're talking about on the RO system, the carbon block would not work for a reef tank because it's 5 microns. It's very fine. It'd be hard to push water through it quickly enough, and the film that would build up over it would clog really rapidly. Now, carbon block is used in RODI systems, and that's very normal. It's very standard. It's been industry standard forever. And then some people have added loose carbon in a housing, sort of like DI resin, same principle, to deal with chloramines, because the granular activated carbon can help to break the chlorine and the ammonia apart so they can be extracted. Reef Junkie says, do you know if kalkwasser will precipitate with 2-part? I'm dosing both of them around the same time. Well, I would stop dosing them at the same time. You could do kalkwasser throughout the night. You can dose your alkalinity early in the morning, and you can dose your calcium late in the afternoon, and that should avoid any kind of precipitation whatsoever. Here comes Jack in the bark. Uh-oh. My fingers. Thanks, Caitlin. I hit that mute button so fast. Let's see. Rad Reefs says, I have a 55-gallon mixed reef tank with a Coral Beauty. At what size should I remove the Coral Beauty as he's getting big? Actually, I think that would be okay in a 55 for a while. I had one in my 55, and it was beautiful. And then later on, I put it in my 280, and it was just as beautiful. So, if you're planning a tank upgrade in the future, but that's a dwarf angel, so it would be okay in a 55. I guess that depends on how much rock is jammed in that tank. If there's swimming room in there and it's getting around fine, I think it's okay. But yeah, it might like something bigger. It's good reason to upgrade to a larger tank. Thank you, Andrea. She says, no, you cannot use safety stop for mandarins. And I had a feeling you couldn't, because you can't use it with scaleless fish. That's great. Little Lagoon Reef says, any experience with Clarkie clowns? I want to set up a natural coastal lagoon type tank with Clarkies or skunks. I would recommend the skunks because they are nice and friendly and passive, where the Clarkies are aggressive and mean and will bite you when you're trying to clean your tank. I actually talked about the Clarkies earlier in this live stream, so I would avoid it. You can do your homework on Google and just see what you find, but they are well known to be aggressive. They're like little bulldogs, and they will look for the soft meat between your fingers, and they will bite that, or they'll hit the back of your wrist, and they will rip the meat off, and you'll be bleeding in your tank. So I really don't like to recommend those to anyone. And I would point you toward the skunks. That would be better. Rad Reese also asked about using lace rock in the saltwater aquarium. And I don't think we want to use lace rock either. I think that's sort of in that situation, just like lava rock that we were talking about earlier. I might be wrong on that one, but I have a feeling I'm right that you don't want to use lace rock. Dave says, I'm setting up a 7 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot mixed reef next month, and I want to keep some wrasses, but I'm not sure which species. What sandbed depth would you recommend? Well, I like a 4-inch sandbed, but some people don't like that. I find that's great. It works out really well for the benthic creatures that live in the sandbed, the pods, the worms, you know, the filter feeders, all that stuff down there. And if you have a wrasse wants to dive down, there's plenty of sand to get in. And you're going to have some wrasses you're going to buy that may not even live in the sand, and they might cocoon themselves in the rockwork at night in an actual mucus bubble. So, you know, you're not forced to have this deep sand bed necessarily, but I think it looks better. Plus, it's not going to stay 4 inches straight across, even though you set it up that way. Once flow happens in the tank and things are moving around and things are digging and Nasaria snails are working and fish are fanning their fins against the sand and blowing it here and there a little bit, it'll be kind of a wavy sand bed. Sort of like mine is rather uneven here. There's low spots and high spots. No matter how much I try to level it out, it's never level. But I like that depth. It's a good depth. Anton says, could one keep a predator fish in a reef tank? No, because it's a predator. It's going to eat the other stuff in the tank because it's a predator. Some people will put like a little tiny Fu Manchu lionfish in their reef tank because it's so small and it stays small. It's a dwarf lion that it will just eat the food being offered it. But if a fish gets too close, like a clown goby, that would be a snack. It's a chance that it could be devoured. So that's a small predator that I have seen in a reef tank, but it's just not ideal. And Brandon says, how do you feel about a mixed reef with LPS softies stocked with a crazy amount of small fish? Barnacle blennies, firefish, pipefish, etc. I love it. Totally do it. And post pictures. I want to see it in Club Mueller's Reef. Here's the link to that. If you guys aren't a member yet, please do join. Club Mueller's Reef has probably got, I don't know, we're probably coming up with 9,000 members. And a lot of people each day are sharing pictures of their tank, sharing videos, asking questions, answering questions. It's a really great group of friendly people because that's our rule. You have to be nice. And I would love to see this tank that you're describing. If you set one up like that, I'd love to see it not only once, but over time. I follow a different guy on Instagram, Garrett's Reef, and he has this shallow tank with a volcano coming out. And I've been following him forever. And one day he bought something from my website. And I saw the email address or something. I was like, hey, I follow this guy. And I had to send him a little note with his package. And he didn't know I was following him on Instagram. But I love that tank. It's so cool. And he's got some things that live on the top of the dry rock sticking out in the air. And he had some plants on there as well. It's a really cool tank. And from time to time, he'll even do special requests. Like I asked him, please film the room it's in so we can see where you're coming from or how you're doing this. Because I had a feeling it was basically, as you're coming down the stairs, it's at the base of the staircase, and that's exactly what it was. And he shared that video on Instagram as well. So cool ideas to have lots of tiny fish. It's a lot of activity. It's a very light bioload, and you can get away with a lot. Plus, LPS and softies are dirty water corals anyway, so you don't really have to worry about maintaining these pristine water qualities that we do with SPS corals. So I say do it. Bradley says, I just got my first Calastria this morning, which is the trumpet coral or the candy cane coral. Any special or personal tips for keeping them happy? Well, they like soft flow, gentle flow, because if you hit too hard, it peels the skeleton right off the branches. And they do like to be fed. You can feed broadcast food like Reef. You can even make that a paste. And you can turn off all the flow in the tank late at night when the lights are out, and you can squirt that thicker paste at the polyp heads, and you'll see all these little like small tentacles coming out. They will capture it and pull it into the mouth, but they're very slow eaters, and you can actually feed them once or twice a week that way. And I like to feed my tank right before lights out, and that way all the fish go crazy and have their meal, and now they're full, right? And then when the lights turn off, if I want to add more food to the tank, like broadcast food, all the corals can open up and there won't be fish nipping at them. And it's a good way to get food into your corals because you have given them the flavor of food in the water, so they start thinking, I need to open up. The fish are busy devouring it all, and then you chase that food with like a liquid food or some other kind of broadcast food, or you're target feeding with some kind of a syringe or a long pipette or a turkey baster, and you can actually feed these other corals. But you have to have the flow off to do it so it doesn't blow away if you're trying to target feed, and then set a timer. So when the timer goes off, you turn the pumps back on. That's so important. Some people on this channel are watching and have an Apex controller or some other controller where they have a button they can push that automatically restarts pumps in so many minutes, 15 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever it is. And that will save your reef. If you turn things off manually, like you turn your light on and you turn it off each day by hand, you turn pumps off, you turn pumps on by hand, you forget. You just do. It's just you're human. So automating that with timers is ideal. And a controller allows you to turn a pump off and it will restart in so many minutes so that you can maintain flow in the tank and you don't kill your livestock. So that's really important. And it's worth considering. If you haven't got one yet, you should start thinking. And I do sell the Apex if you need that. The Grim Reefer says, what do you use to calibrate your TDS meter? Nothing, but you can test your TDS meter in some distilled water. Go buy yourself a gallon. It's going to be like 49 cents at Target or Walmart. Get your come home with your gallon of distilled water and put your meter in. As long as it reads 0, your TDS meter is working properly. But Digital Aquatics, I think that's right. They make the TDS meter, and no, HM. It's not Hannah. Oh, HM is the brand for most TDS meters, and they say in their instructions to use TDS calibration solution, but I don't know where to buy it. I've done a dive before. I've even contacted suppliers, and it seems like nobody has the calibration solution, which seems kind of silly. You have a meter and you want to calibrate it, but you don't have a way to know. But if you use distilled water and the meter is not measuring 0, you can actually adjust the screw and set it to 0 and continue with your life. So that's one way of doing it because it's absolutely pristine. That water is made from steam, so there's nothing in it. And using a brand new gallon each time you do this is your best bet. Yeah, you're going to have 99% of that water you don't need when you're done, but you can then give it to your spouse to use in their iron because distilled water is used in irons because it has no water spots and it won't damage the surface of the iron. So it's not like it's wasted water. And like I said, it costs you 49 cents. Rob says, what is the latest coral you added to your reef? Any big plans for 2021? I don't remember adding a coral in a long time. I added stuff before COVID. I remember adding an arrow crab that vanished. We added a pistol shrimp that vanished. I don't remember buying any corals in the last 12 months. I just grow the stuff I have. I mentioned in the last stream that I have an area in the back of my reef that's just a whole bunch of corals growing on the sand that just need a place to be, and they're just sitting there. So I guess I don't have a pressing need. Plus, I don't really have anywhere to put it. But you know, if I wanted to get something, I don't know. I think if any new corals get acquired, they'll go in Caitlin's tank when she gets her tank. Glenn says, would top-end fish that are very costly, are they more delicate with water conditions? Are they caught in less numbers in difficult areas to catch in the sea? Are they demanding in the aquarium? Yeah, everything you're saying is pretty much fact. So you get these deep water fish. They were captured by divers that were willing to risk their lives to get down to this point to get these fish. And they typically are, even though they cost so much, they're typically the first ones to go while your stupid clownfish keeps living no matter what. So while you can set up a tank and have everything correct for that fish, there's no guarantee it's going to work out for you long term. It'd be awesome to do that, but it's a big risk financially too, because.
It's not like maroon clown though. At the end of the day, it's still a clownfish.
Well, Caitlin is saying like the maroon clown, like the lightning maroon, it's still in the clownfish family, but I'm just telling you, I've seen this happen when things go wrong in the tank. The ones that cost you the most usually are the first to die. And all the hardy ones, you know, are the ones that really cost nothing. It would have been easy to replace. When I lost that powder blue Tang, I lost a beautiful flame angel. I lost a copper band. I mean, everything I lost were things that were really hard to replace. And so I just take that with a grain of salt, that there's a good chance that whatever it is that you are getting, there's no absolute guarantee you're going to keep it long term. We want to, but it doesn't always work out that way. Wilmar says, I'm thinking about rescuing some yellow-tailed damsels from Petco since the display looks awful and dirty. I feel bad for the fish. Yeah, but then what are you going to do with these guys when they're in your tank? Because you have a tank now filled with aggressive yellow-tailed damselfish. It's just a choice you have to make. Now, you could set up a little tiny, clean damsel tank. It'd be kind of fun. And you could put, I don't know, some green star polyps or something in there and just have this really cool splash of color. And be sort of like a species tank. I bet it would get some really good reactions from people too. And it'll be fun to have, and you wouldn't have to feel bad about them anymore. Kenneth says, are there any tips for eradicating Anthelia growing up on my zoas? Yeah, you're going to have to peel that off. You're going to have to peel and peel and peel till you get rid of as much of it as possible. That is a super invasive coral that I don't recommend for anyone. And usually, the only time we see it is in a tank that someone gave up, because they gave up because the Anthelia was so aggressive. It grows over everything. It will outcompete every coral you have, and you know it will just be a massive Anthelia. Someone might like that look, but it's very few and far between. They're not even a pretty coral. So you're going to peel that off and remove it from your tank would be my recommendation to you. Scott says, hope everything's going well. She was on the first half of the stream, so you just have to go to the beginning to see it. You must have just tuned in a little bit late. Regis says, have I ever cared for a Tomini Tang? I have not. Could it be kept in a 65-gallon reef tank? If it's a tiny one, yes. If it's just a normal size Tang, I would say no. I would go with a bigger tank. At least a 90, and that's still small. William says, I got my RODI replacement filters. Love getting the coasters. Thanks. You're welcome. And it's time to order new coasters, everyone. We're going to have a new one for the first half of this year. And I'm still debating what to put on it. And William also said one of his favorite corals is the Weeping Willow Leather. Oh, that's a really pretty one. Remarkable Reefs, thank you so much for the super chat. He says, hey Mark, big fan. Thanks for all the free information. Love watching your videos. Have a new Red Sea Peninsula 650 coming on Wednesday, and I'm very excited. Congratulations on your new tank. That's going to be so fun to set up, and I look forward to seeing pictures of it in Club Miller's Reef. Rad's Reef says, do you trust quote-unquote peaceful damselfish? There's not very many of them, so I'm going to say no, because it may be peaceful initially and then later on become aggressive. Damsels just are not great fish to have, unfortunately. I mean, they're hardy as can be, but they're just not ideal. Adam says, have you ever seen a starry blenny chase a mandarin? I got the blenny, he seems to be really going after the mandarin. I'm really concerned. Yeah, that's not great. You may need to remove the starry blenny temporarily and then maybe bring it back to the tank. You just got the blenny, so that may not work. If you just got it and it's already aggressive, you may need to change your mind, I think. How are we doing on time? All right, we're going to do a little bit more here, maybe 5-10 more minutes, because I'm starving. I don't know about you guys, but I need to eat.
Can you sandwich?
And you don't want to see me sitting here chewing on stuff. Sure, thank you.
What kind?
Whatever you want.
All right.
Caitlin's going to make me a sandwich. Green Plant says, I can't keep an anemone in my tank. This is the 4th or 5th one that's gone downhill. I think it's dinoflagellates, irritating them to death. I don't know at this point. Whenever your tank is in a situation like dinoflagellates is taking over, that's not the time to introduce new livestock. it won't help fight the dinos, and the dinos are toxic to livestock. And yeah, it could be affecting these anemones you're buying. For now, I would focus on getting the tank nice and clean and pristine again, back to its normal pretty self, and then you could try. And then you need to find out what is lacking on your system. I do have a video on this channel about bubble tip anemones, if that's the kind you're keeping, and I go into all their needs, including quality light, good flow, reef parameters. I mean, it's not even a long video, it's like 18 minutes. And it will definitely answer a lot of questions about anemone care. I have been keeping anemones. I still have some of my original anemones from 2002 in my tank. And they've been through a lot. They've been through good times and bad times, and they've been doing really well for the last 7 years, because that's the tank they're in now. And that tank, actually, I took a picture, a screenshot. You know, on Facebook, it's like, on this day, there was a picture when I first set up the tank in, I guess, what is that, 2013? And there was like 2 anemones in there. And then I was looking at that picture, and I'm standing looking at the cube, and it's like 1 billion tentacles. And I was like, wow, what a change 7 years makes. But yeah, if you're having problems with them, I wouldn't keep buying them, because you want to solve the problem first and then start introducing livestock. And know your homework too on what that needs and why it's not working out. And if it really was dinos all this time, well, even more of a reason why you need to solve that problem. Variant says, will activated carbon remove oils that are impacting the skimmer? I added a new piece of equipment and foam head has totally collapsed. No, I don't think carbon would do it. I think you might be able to trap it in a fine mesh filter sock, like a 5 micron or 10 micron sock, which I do sell on the site. The oils will get out of the system. You just leave that skimmer running long enough, and the foam head will rebuild. Keep in mind too that we put in oily foods like PE mysis in our tanks daily, I do, to feed the tank, and the foam collapses, and then it builds up again and pushes out into the cup and goes into my waste collector. So oils don't necessarily wipe out a skimmer nonstop. It may be just down now for a day or two, but it should get back on track within, within reason. And if that doesn't work, you may have to just do a big water change to kind of remove as much as you can from the system and then resume. But anytime we get new equipment, it's best to rinse it, wipe it down with something, use vinegar water if you like. And that way, when you put it in your system, it's less prone to do something strange in your tank. And that even goes for new pumps. The new pump you buy, it's brand new out of the box. It's got an impeller. They probably put some kind of lubricant on it. It's possible it could mess with your protein skimmer temporarily, but usually within a day, things get back to normal. Jason says, did you just invite us over for dinner? If so, when? I'll bring dessert. And he means cookies. Let's see. Thomas says, I'm going in for knee surgery next Wednesday. Well, good luck. I hope things go well. And said, should I have someone come over and clean out my skimmer and change my filter sock until I'm able to do it? Or will it be fine for 6 weeks? I would have someone do that for you. Maybe you can get somebody from the fish store to come over and help you with that. And that way you can stay on top of it, because we want your tank to do well while you're healing. John says, speaking of lighting, how long should you run the Refugium lights at night? My main lights turn on at 3:30 p.m. and are totally off by 12:30 a.m. Should the Refugium light run the whole off time? No, I would run them for 9 hours a day. And that also depends on what type of macroalgae you're growing in the Refugium. But if you run them for about 9 hours a day, Chetomorpha, some type of Caulerpa like the feather Caulerpa I keep do perfectly well under that. There's other types of Caulerpa that you may have that actually go sexual when they're not under 24-hour day of light. But then you lose the benefit of the whole reverse light cycle to maintain pH at night, because it's running 24 hours a day, and the plants don't live 24 hours a day. They're not photosynthesizing, going through photosynthesis 24 hours a day. They can't. They last about 7-8 hours, and then they basically go into a small coma until they can somehow recharge to go through it again, even though the light's on nonstop. But that's what people were doing 15, 20 years ago to stop Caulerpa from going sexual. But it was like grape Caulerpa. There's another one. there's another one called Caulerpa numularia, which looks like little half cups. They're not round, they're like little cups on these branches. Those things would go sexual really badly and just turn clear, and all the green went into the tank, and the tank turned green. So, but for like Chetomorpha and for feather Caulerpa, 9 hours a day of light. So from, let's say, 1 in the morning to 9, 10 a.m. would be fine, and then I would turn it off again. Skyman says, I was using that carbon block, the carbon block question I answered earlier. He's using it for the aquarium once a month to remove the yellowing. I wouldn't use the RODI block carbon filter for that. I would definitely not. I would use granulated activated carbon in a reactor. And you can use one of those RO housings with one of those cartridges that people would DI in and fill it up with a granulated activated carbon and maybe put bigger holes near the top so water can flow through it easily. And then you want to move water through it gradually. 1 to 5 gallons an hour is all it takes. And let it run overnight, or let it run for 2 or 3 days, and then remove it from the system and you're done. But I wouldn't use an RO filter for running in the tank. Bandit says, how long would a gold rim Tang be comfortable in a 70-gallon tank? Not very long. They need a lot of swimming room. I would go with a bigger tank. Rob says, what's the price on the ATO reservoir? This one was $125. Thomas, that's great news. He said he just talked to his boss and he's going to get Rod's food in next week. See, if you just tell the fish store owner you want something, they'll bring it in because they want to make money. I'm so glad that was taken care of during the stream. I love that. Brad says, I have a pest maybe? It looks like a chitin, or I'm sorry, a chitin, but with a hard shell. Any ideas? They're all over the glass, gathering alongside the flipper and edge of the MP40s. You might be looking at keyhole limpets. You could be looking at stomatellas maybe, or it could be chitins. So I'd have to see a picture of it. If you can put some pictures in Club Meals Reef and tag me, or you don't have to tag me. Anyone else can answer you too. But if you tag me, I'll see it, and I'd be happy to take a look and see what you got going on. You can also go to the Critter ID section of my website and look at the pest section and see if anything looks like your quote-unquote pest. Otherwise, it might be in the snail section. Snails and slugs and nudibranchs and stuffs. Senior Gatos says, my female lightning maroon clownfish died yesterday. The day before, she was perfectly fine, no physical damage. Any ideas? No, sorry, I don't have any ideas. The fish that I had that lived 12 and a half years, it literally was breeding, laying eggs, active, eating, and the next day was completely dead for no reason whatsoever. I have no idea. Maybe there's something in your tank that lives in the rockwork that hurt it. It's complete guesswork. I have no idea what happened to your fish. I'm sorry. Sorry to hear that happened. Pat says, I started late, so I'm an hour behind in the stream, but COVID is what got me into this hobby. I found out on 3/13 that the 16th would be my last day of work, so I ordered on the 16th. Good job. That's actually pretty awesome. We have done some crazy things in the last year, haven't we? But, that's I hope you're enjoying the hobby, and I'm sorry to hear about the loss of your job. Mackenzie says, any cheap but decent lights you could recommend for an anemone tank, or should I just go big? There are lots of lights on the market. SB Reefs sells a all-inclusive light fixture that's pretty affordable. There's so many. I'm sure 10 people have answered you in the chat as well. I like the Radion light fixture. It costs more, but it covers a 2-foot by 2-foot square area, and I think it's around $300, $350 for that light, which is a lot of money. I get it, but it's also a light that will last you 5 years, so you don't have to replace bulbs or anything, and it's using DC power, so the wattage isn't going to be crazy high, I don't believe. So I mean, I've been running it so long I don't even know. But I use Radions over my anemones, and it works out really, really well. Lucas says, I had a bad diatom outbreak for 2 months. I wasn't home for 1.5 days, and when I came to feed the fish and look at the tank, there wasn't any diatoms. Well, that's great. Sometimes we just have to keep our hand out of the tank for a little bit so it can kind of heal. You might have been in that scenario, or it could be this will return now that you're back throwing food in the tank. Maybe you're overfeeding the tank. But I'm glad to hear it's finally cleared up after these 2 months. I know how frustrating it can be to see that brown mulm on your sand bed. And sometimes it is a combination of things we do on a regular basis. And you might have to kind of change up your approach to kind of help this, let this thing clear up and stay gone. But for now, congratulations, that's good news. Lucas says, how can I position the MP40, thank you, on the back of my wall without blowing the sand around the front wall? I hate power heads on the sides. You can turn down the flow. That's one way. You can raise them up higher, but you may need a larger grade of sand that is less prone to movement. That's pretty much it. I mean, the thing is, the Vortec you have, the MP40, has like 6 different cycles. So you can choose lagoon mode, reef crest, tidal surge, pulse. There's so many options. You may find some other setting that you prefer, or you can do like, I use reef crest mostly, but I have actually 4 different modes every single day on both of my tanks. And that goes through all its different patterns, and the sand just does what it does. But I understand you want your sand to be a certain way. I get it. You may be able to possibly put some rock down in the sand to create like a dam, like halfway back, so that the sand has to stay in the front of the tank. Or it may blow over your dam and go to the back of the tank too. It really depends what intensity you're running that pump at. Taylor says, how high should I mount my T5s to grow SPS corals? The general rule of thumb when it comes to T5 lighting is to have it 7 inches off the water or higher. If you put it any closer, not only are you putting heat in the tank because of the heat coming off those bulbs, you're also putting some radiation into the water. You know, it's like UV radiation or something. So have it at 7 inches. And that being said, there are some light makers, that build fixtures where the legs are 2.5 inches. That's just, they made it because they wanted to, because it's easier to sell. It's a smaller box, whatever, but it's not great. So having your lights 7 inches off the water would be best. Gary says, do you test potassium levels, and if so, how important is it? And actually, it is pretty important. I don't test it. I've got a couple of test kits, but they're hard to read. Typically, ICP will give you that number, so you can find out, through a test from time to time. And you can measure. You want your number to be somewhere around, I think it's 380 to 400. So if it's down like a 320 or something like that, you can dose potassium to your tank. And I know Fauna Marin sells a bottle of potassium, for example. So you can actually follow the directions there and bring your number up. But if you don't have a test kit you can reliably, easily read, you're going to have to do an ICP test, find out the number, do the math, dose, and then maybe a month and a half from now, do another ICP test to see if you should continue that dose or back off. So you're not overdosing potassium. Smoking Reefer says, what do you say in your experience is the suggested ideal nitrate and phosphate level for growth in a mixed reef? You want your nitrates to be around 5 or less. 5 to 10 would be perfectly fine. Some people have them as much as 20. Others have them at 0. 5 would be kind of a good number. You could have it a little bit lower, but go with 5. And then phosphates should be 0.03, 0.05, maybe as much as 0.1. Some people would freak out at 0.1, but I'm not scared of phosphate because I just treat the tank when I need to. But some phosphate and some nitrate is essential in a reef tank. And when tanks have no nitrate and phosphate, that's why they have the problems with dinoflagellates and these weird brown mulms that get on the sand bed and won't go away, and other issues that arise, and pale corals. So you need some nitrate and phosphate. And you can actually dose those. If your tank is so pristine that you have none, you can use Neo Nitro and Neo Phos. These are 2 products that Brightwell makes that I now sell for people like you. People like, not you, because I don't know what your situation is. People that are watching this channel said, I need it, so I sell that product for them. I'd rather just sell them bottles of my water and give them all the nitrate and phosphate they want, but that would be unethical, right? Who wants my used water? All right, that was the last question. We're going to stop right there. Today is water test Saturday. Please test your water. We want to make sure that your nitrate, phosphate, alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, salinity, temperature, pH are all in range. And if they're not, you need to make corrections. Of course, we want to clean our protein skimmers, including the neck of the skimmer. We want to, if you have a waste collector, drain it now. Especially with those weird weather changes, you know, protein skimmers can act up. Matter of fact, the person that talked about their foam collapsing in the skimmer, maybe you had a change of weather, that did barometric pressure change in the area. It has nothing to do with a new piece of equipment, and it's literally the barometric pressure changed, and which means that your skimmer will come back to its normalcy in due time. Nothing to fear. We want to also check if you're dosing 2-part or 3-part. Make sure your containers are full and not empty, and make sure that the dosing pumps are putting out the right amount. That would mean that you have to actually use something to measure the output. Like if you're asking for 40 milliliters, measure that you're really getting 40. And we want to make sure that the tubing that the liquid comes out has been rolled between your fingertips, so nothing crusty or crunchy is obstructing the fluid from draining into your system. So make sure everything is good and operating properly, and then you can enjoy your tank for the next week. That's it. I hope you guys have a great Valentine's Day weekend. Enjoy your reefs, enjoy your loved ones, and we will see you again next week. Bye, guys.